While we're waiting, maybe I could tell you a little bit about what I do, what my background is. So I've been a teacher since 1983, and for most of those years, I've taught what we call humane letters seminars. And thank you so much. Sorry for the goose chase. I've taught humane letters seminars. These are discussions that are rigorous and well-led on classic works of literature, both expository and imaginative. So I've taught everything from Homer and Plato to Hemingway and Heaney and the Federalist Papers and so forth. So my team, when we started Kane Academy 7 years ago, my team tried to drill down and articulate to the best of our ability a very discrete set of skill sets, and that is, well, how do you lead a seminar? How do you teach fiction? How do you teach nonfiction? How do you teach history? How do you teach poetry? How do you teach students to look at a work of art? And then how do you teach writing? So it's kind of a very disciplined, a very Spartan mission that we have, but we're devoted to helping our fellow teachers, up their game in the art of teaching the humanities. So today I just want to say a few things about seminar leadership, and then we're going to shift into a major sphere of seminar leadership and how do we lead students through imaginative works of literature. The word seminar is rooted in the same word as seminary or seminarian, and the word is an agricultural word. It means seed plot. Now, in agriculture, a seed plot is created to literally create a source of seed so you can grow, you can disseminate the seed and grow a bigger crop. And seminarians, when they're sent off to seminary, are trained by the wisdom and the tradition of the church to go out and plant other churches. So, and what we're doing in leading our students in seminar discussions is we're establishing a set of skills and a body of knowledge and loves among our students that'll last them a lifetime. In other words, something relatively small, well-crafted, will grow into a lifelong body of learning. At advanced learning centers like universities and graduate schools, maybe they'll become teachers, but for the rest of their lives, they will think through great texts as they're learning to think through great texts at your feet. Seminars are discussions. There are lots of different kinds of conversation, but discussions are conversations with purpose. And the purpose of a seminar discussion is really one of two kinds. And I'm following Mortimer Adler on this. He says that we read expository works, philosophy, politics, ethics, theology, toward knowledge, and we read imaginative literature toward experience. We study expository works because we ought to think about the things that we ought to think about. That is, the most important questions and issues that face us as humans. What does it mean to be a human? Who is God? What is justice? What is friendship? What is love? What is history? In imaginative literature, we read literature to fuel our imaginations, and we also to fuel our sympathy. That is, we ought to be moved by certain things and not moved by other things. So we bring judgment to bear on works of imaginative literature, but not in the same way as we judge things in the moral realm. When we judge things in the moral realm, we're looking at what? Human actions, human behavior. When we make judgments in the realm of fiction, we're making judgments in the realm of art, and those are aesthetic judgments. The common language is you ought to know some things, and you ought to be moved by other things. So ought is the common language. And it becomes tricky because there is an inclination to kind of collapse the two. Oftentimes in the national renewal movement, teachers will want to moralize. Students will want to moralize. So they're looking in fiction for things that they really should be looking for in expository work. Or they're collapsing all things and driving everything towards ideas, toward didactic instruction, and toward propositional truths. But art is not to be treated that way. It's a different kind of set of genres when we talk about imaginative literature. I want to start with some quotations that I gave you from Flannery O'Connor. You might know her as a short story writer and a novelist. She also was a very fine essayist. And I commend to everyone a beautiful set of essays. Actually, it's footnoted there, right? Mystery and Manners. And if you could have, Mystery and Manners, I would encourage everybody to have a copy of that in their faculty office, or I think this would be a great idea to have the faculty read her essays and have a faculty seminar around them. At the very least, read the 2 or 3 that have to do with the art and the writing of fiction. And these are really good quotations. If you're studying literature, she says, the intentions of the writers have to be found in the work itself and not in his life. In other words, you're not reading novels and short stories and poems and plays in order to get to the life of the writer. Now, you might do something like that as a graduate student. You're doing a dissertation on Shakespeare or on Ernest Hemingway or Jane Austen. And so in graduate studies, there's sort of a convergence of interest in the intention of the author and the text. But we're training young people to see the works of fiction for the first time. And we want them to understand them as works of art, as works of imaginative literature that more or less stand on their own. So we're not shifting into the intention of the author. Fiction writing is a matter of showing things. It's not a matter of didactic instruction. So we don't ask questions like this. What is Shakespeare telling us? Or what is Homer telling us? Or what is Jane Austen or Willa Cather telling us? Rather, they're showing us through the story. The meaning of a story has to be embedded in it. It has to be made concrete in it. A story is a way to say something that can't be said any other way, and it takes every word in the story to say what the meaning is. One of my favorite ways of teaching fiction is, I call it the 2x2 method. So we'll break open a chapter in a novel, or we'll take a short story and we'll go 2 pages at a time, and I'll ask the students to look for 2 things, 2 kinds of details. One are what I call physical details. That is, what do the characters look like? What's their dialect? How are they attired? What time of day is it? Where are they geographically? And then secondly, what do they think? How do we know what they think? By what they say, by what the narrator says, and also by how they respond to one another. And then we go 2 pages at a time, and by the end of the story or by the end of the chapter, we've accrued hundreds of details. And by the end, the meaning of the story or the meaning of the chapter has emerged. It's kind of like this. When you look at a painting, the painter has made a set of judgments. Van Gogh looks at a wheat field with crows above it, and he looks at a wheat field as no other painter looks at the wheat field. And then he recreates his vision in the form of a painting with oil paints, texture, line, color, negative and positive space, and so forth. And by the arrangement of details, he pulls us into the experience that we, in turn, are allowed to recreate, right? And if you attend to all the details that are arranged in the painting, eventually the meaning of the painting will emerge. And it doesn't emerge as sort of a moral or something like that. It emerges, as Adler says, as an experience. We're moved by the vision of the wheat field, by the arrangement. That's how we get into it. We get into it by way of the details. And finally, we come to this. So it is with the Catholic, or let us say with the thoroughly Christianized novelist. No matter how much his character may be improved by the church, if he is a novelist, he has to remain true to his nature as one. The church should make the novelist a better novelist. She's saying 2 things there. The church will make a novelist a better novelist. Why? Because of the breadth and depth of experience. But at the end of the day, the novelist is accountable for being a novelist. Now, how is it then that we aren't exactly getting after, say, the Christian character or the intent of the author when we're looking at something, especially something that's written by say, a Christian or a religious-minded writer? Think about this for a second. Charles Dickens, who was a certain kind of Christian, was brutally cruel to his wife. How does that help us to truly understand, say, the experience between young Ebenezer Scrooge and Belle? They clearly once loved each other, and then they grew distant from each other, and Belle finally let him go. It was of his own choice, but she did let him go because he had chosen something else. I'm not sure that Dickens' cruelty is actually a window into that experience. In fact, I don't think it is at all. But if we gave that, if we told our students up front that Charles Dickens was brutally cruel to his wife, young people are going to have a really hard time taking A Christmas Carol seriously. See what I mean? Here's another parallel. Caravaggio painted beautiful paintings depicting all sorts of scenes from the New Testament. Really stunning, some of the greatest scenes ever depicted. But he did not live an exemplary Christian life. And if we told the students about that, it would be difficult for them to look at the calling of St. Matthew or the entombment of Christ or something like that with any seriousness. That's what I'm talking about. So it's best to let Caravaggio stand as a painter and Charles Dickens as a novelist and Flannery O'Connor as a short story writer, rather than look at their personal biographies and say, that's the lens by which we're going to understand their story. Let the work of art more or less stand on its own. Okay, so let's go to what I call 8 forms of literary distraction. A seminar is a discussion. A seminar is a conversation with purpose. And the purpose is, in the case of imaginative literature, is experience. It's to be moved by that which we ought to be moved by. A seminar is led by a dynamic seminar leader. Seminars are not led by the students. And the teacher is not either there to lecture to the students, nor to be a traffic cop, sort of letting one student after another talk and let the conversation go wherever it goes. No, you should have a plan about where the conversation goes. And the plan is executed by way of questions. That is, good questions are the chief tools by which a good seminar leader leads a purposeful conversation, a useful and knowledgeable and fruitful discussion. The number one rule, like if you could take away one thing from me today, take this away. Ask questions that lead the students into the text. Don't ask questions that lead the students out of the text. Lead them into the text. Get their noses into the text. Now, you can do that by asking them questions. You can also do it by saying, go to this passage, read it out loud, and tell me what you see, or tell me what the meaning is. All right, so here are some pitfalls that teachers sometimes fall into. Seeking the intent of the author. I've already talked about that. I think it's unfruitful, especially for young students. To read the story as a historical or cultural artifact. If, for example, the main reason that we read, say, Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, or the Oresteia by Aeschylus, or Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, is to understand the Greek mind. Well, there is something about that. I mean, we do learn a lot about ancient Greece, and historians take all that literature seriously. But we're not teaching history when we're teaching literature. We're teaching literature. And the main job that we have is to train our students to see the work of fiction as a work of art, not as an historical artifact. So try to index that, or put in the margins the historical concern, which is a real concern, and let the integrity of imaginative literature stand on its own. We teach the liberal arts and sciences, and Aristotle's the father of that, would separate imaginative literature under poetics from something like politics. So we would do better if we followed suit with Aristotle in that regard. Don't read the story as a break or continuity with a previous text. A lot of people in the renewal movement will say every text has to echo every other text. Or I should say every text echoes at least some other text. And the students are constantly being asked, how does this relate to a previous text? Or how does this, I wouldn't do that. Because a writer doesn't write a work of fiction strictly as an homage to another work of fiction. There's a North Carolinian author whose name escapes me. He wrote a book that takes place in the Civil War called Cold Mountain. He was gonzo about Homer. He was also gonzo about Cormac McCarthy. So the novel's storyline is imitative of the Odyssey. His syntax, his style, is very much like Cormac McCarthy. But at the end of the day, Cold Mountain stands on its own as a novel. It's not, so you don't have to read the Odyssey or read Cormac McCarthy's famous trilogy in order to understand Cold Mountain. You can understand the novel. It stands on its own just fine. And there are a lot of things that are sort of loosely connected to the tradition. So Dante's Divine Comedy is epic poetry. He read Virgil, but he didn't read Homer. So there's, some people want to say, well, the the Ulysses in Dante's Divine Comedy must be the Odysseus of Homer, but it's not. He didn't read that. So sometimes the connections are not going to be there, although we think they might be. Don't drive the discussion to your own interpretation of the text exclusively. Now, you're the smartest person in the room, and you're the leader of the discussion, and you are the standard for all things plausible. In seminar discussions, we run discussions that are liberal. In this sense, we entertain all plausible interpretations. And who's the judge of plausibility? You are. You're the one who's read the book most closely, probably read it multiple times. You know the secondary literature, you've talked to your fellow teachers. You've got a big bank of knowledge and understanding and a big bank of comprehension and pedagogy. So you're the one who's leading the discussion. However, our job as seminar leaders is not to disciple our students to the exact way that we think about the text, but to train them to be liberal, independent thinkers, each man, each woman on his or her own, so that any of our students can work through the text with facility. And that means we're going to get some competing interpretations. But the interpretations that should be encouraged should be plausible ones, and you're the judge of that. Don't create an alternative ending. There's a terrible irreverence among some literature teachers. I see this all the time in schools. They say, well, what if we could just recreate the ending of this novel or this story? That's a terrible irreverence, and we don't want to foster irreverence or impiety. We want to foster reverence and piety towards the great authors. If a book is in the canon, we should first of all, we should recognize that classic works of literature have been tested generationally, from one generation to the next, and next, and next, and they were found to be standouts in their own time, and then repeatedly standouts in our enduring culture. So our first crack at this should be, let's maintain the integrity of the work and not undermine it. I'll give you an example. One of the ones I hear the most criticism of is the ending of Huck Finn. Do any of you teach Huck Finn? No. Okay. Well, if you've read Huck Finn, you might remember that having helped Jim get free, he then he goes back home and he has chances to be taken care of by these women, has a chance maybe to go back this town. He decides to do none of that, and he goes out west to the frontier. And some people think, it's just a very unsatisfying ending to the story. But what I always encourage teachers and students to do is to read that ending in light of the whole novel. So what's the main movement or action of the novel? It's the Odyssey down the Mississippi. That these two friends, a young white man and an older black man, forge a friendship. They go through terrible adventures. They have their difficulties, their dust-ups. They reconcile, and increasingly they see one another's humanity. It's a beautiful novel. But at the end of it, you would think, okay, well, now it's time for Huck to kind of settle in. But no, he's not ready to settle in. There's still a sense in which things haven't changed. You think about the beginning of the novel. The way that the white boys talk is clearly reflective of being marinated in slave culture. By the end of the novel, Tom Sawyer is still talking that way, but not Huck. Huck has changed. But there's a tension between Huck and Tom. There's a tension between Huck and the places where he could have a life there, in Missouri and along the Mississippi. So there's a sense in which the Odyssey for Huck continues, like he's still searching. He's still longing for something that he hasn't found yet. That's a very deep and real and profound human experience. So let it stay. Mark Twain, he knew what he was doing. He had a pretty good talent. Don't adjudicate a character's actions. I see this all the time where teachers will say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're all reading Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We're going to take Edmund. Edmund, that little dastardly fellow, has betrayed Aslan and his siblings. All right, let's put him on trial. This half of the class, you're going to be the prosecuting attorneys. The other half, you're going to be the defense attorneys. And we're going to put them on trial and figure out whether, betraying someone like Aslan, betraying one's siblings is a defensible or, an indictable offense. Okay, first of all, the answer to the question, should Edmund have betrayed his siblings in Aslan, is no, of course not. That's the easiest question to ever ask kids. It's not a very interesting question. And it won't help the students to place the question over here and create a court case. Like, There's not a court case in the novel, so why are we doing that anyway? But it's not a juridical case. It's not even an ethical case study. It's a story. And remember, Flannery O'Connor says the story writer says what she says by way of the story and not by way of, say, moral philosophy or by way of jurisprudence. However, what if we ask, why did Edmund betray his siblings and Aslan? Now that's potentially very fruitful discussion. And C.S. Lewis, in his genius, has left breadcrumbs. The very beginning of the story, what's the context? The kids have been extracted from their parents and set down someplace foreign in this strange man's house. All right, that right there, that is a stage setting for a very interesting set of events for young people. Secondly, what happens when that happens? Or what do we see happen? We see what happens. It's very recognizable if the kids would just pay attention. Susan, it's very maternal, sort of bosses Edmund around a little bit. Peter, the golden boy, oh man, it really grates on a kid like Edmund, right? And Lucy, the youngest, is naturally the lowest fruit on the vine, the lowest kid on the totem pole to pick on, right? So you think about the relationship with all three kids, that's Edmund. Edmund is, he's irritable, he's jealous, he's without his parents, he's afraid, he's also belligerent, and then he's appetitive. And so when he's offered Turkish delight, of course he grabs it, but he can't get out of that problem. Like he makes so many choices that eventually he can't get out of his problem. The Turkish delight is cursed, and he can't get away from a desire for more and more and more. So Aslan has to pay the price. He has to win Edmund's life back by giving his own life. It was very powerful storytelling. The girls are crushed, but paragraphs after Aslan dies, the girls see Aslan rise from the dead, and they're crying and laughing at the same time as the three of them play a game of chase. It's just what kids would do, right? It's all very believable, very powerful. Then Edmund comes back, he reconciles with everyone, and then he goes to battle. But for the little flask that Lucy has, the sibling that he picked on, but for her flask, he would have died. He's so willing to give his life now. That's a great turnaround, isn't it? That's a great redemptive story. So it shouldn't be the case that we put him on trial. Rather, we should be moving with Edmund to recognize why he does what he does at any given juncture, from the moment he's a pain in the tush with his siblings to the moment that he lays down his life for the right side of the war. That's great stuff. That's what we should be doing with our students. I would also say, try not to look for the virtue at work in the story. So stories are not moral philosophy. And stories rarely give us sort of the life of a person. Rarely do we see the habituation to moral virtue. Aristotle says first of all, you're not taught moral virtue, you are habituated to it, which means you have to do it again and again and again and again. And it takes a lifetime to be morally excellent. Most of the characters that we encounter, we only see them for a little bit of time. So even somebody like Sidney Carton in A Tale of Two Cities, he does something wonderfully courageous and is self-sacrificing at the end of the novel. But his action, though admirable, hardly fits into a typical Aristotelian case study of ethics, that we just don't know if he's actually habitually courageous. He does the right thing at the end, and that's very laudable. And finally, don't have your students insert themselves into the story. The story is not about the students. It's about what the story is about. But the story does pull the students into the imaginative world created by the writer. And by that being pulled into it, something wonderful happens. The parochial experience of the students expands to a broader experience by the world given to us by the writers. And one novel, one play, one poem after another means the students are expanding. They're experientially growing. That's the pay dirt of education. Okay, so those are, and I won't go into details now. I sort of told you what the 8 forms of literary attention are in response to the 8 forms of literary distraction. So let's put our tools to work here. There's a list of questions, and these are questions I've collected from seminars all around the country. Teachers have asked these things of their students, and I'm going to suggest up front that there's something undeveloped, something weak about each of these questions that could be improved. None of the questions are completely stupid or completely irrelevant to what we're doing in the classroom. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we could do a better job with better questions. So I want you to look through the list and try to eyeball a question or more that is from a text that you're more or less familiar with. And then I want you then to volunteer and say, okay, this is what I think might be wrong with the question, and then this is how I think I might improve it. And we're all in this together, so don't be afraid of taking a crack at it. We're going to help one another. And it could be that you're going to hit the ball out of the park the first time. It could be that we all may need to pitch in and give you some help. Who would like to volunteer? Or how about this? Why don't I do the first one? I'll model this. I'll model the exercise. Let's look at, should Hamlet have spoken so cruelly to Ophelia? Okay, so there's a prohibition I'm suggesting on should questions almost all the time. Okay, I don't want to be imperious or onerous about this, but in general, I would say ask why questions. Hamlet is cruel to Ophelia. There's no doubt about it. And when we move with Ophelia's experience of his cruelty, we feel the pain that she has. And that's the way we should respond to what Hamlet does. We also move with Hamlet in his own suffering. From the beginning of the play, he's the only person mourning the death of his father, who just died a few weeks ago, and here his mother is marrying his brother. This just doesn't feel right. It's all wrong. And we move with Hamlet in that regard. We move with him when he sees his father's ghost, and he learns that his mother's new husband is actually the murderer of his father. These things are very powerful, and we move with the suffering of Hamlet. We move with the suffering of Ophelia. So what's a question we could ask that isn't a should question? Well, the simplest move, the most economical move, is to replace should with why. Why is Hamlet so cruel to Ophelia? Now, it ends up being a pretty darn interesting question. You remember the first time we see him cruel to her, he's just given his most famous speech, to be or not to be. And then he sees her coming. And it's all sweet. He's got sweetness on his mind, sweetness in his heart toward Ophelia. And then as they start their conversation, Shakespeare doesn't tell us what they are. He doesn't give us a stage direction. But she says, I had these remembrances to return to you. The way Kenneth Branagh in his version on film does it, she has a stack of love letters that she gives back to Hamlet. And then as the conversation immediately escalates into cruelty. Get thee to a nunnery. And then, but also in the middle there, somewhere he says, where is your father? And suddenly he's aware of that kind of spy element that's all through the play. Claudius and Polonius are spying on Hamlet. Polonius sends his daughter Ophelia into the scene as a pawn to ferret out of Hamlet more information. Claudius will send Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to spy on and to trip up and lead to the death of young Hamlet. Hamlet is spying on Claudius as he prays. All these things are going on in the court. It's all part of the dramatic situation. So the constraints within which Hamlet and Ophelia are working are the constraints led by the current king, who's also a murderer, by his right-hand man, Polonius. And in turn, they respond to those situations accordingly. Okay, so that makes for a terribly interesting conversation. And it's not easy to get at it, right off the bat, why he's so cruel. We know early on in Act 1 that Hamlet says, I will act in a manic way. Okay, I'm going to have to get revenge against Claudius, but in order to do that, I have to be very crafty inside the court. Later on, he'll have the itinerant actors stage a play within the play, and it's meant to draw out of Claudius and Gertrude their guilty sensibilities. Okay, so all that's a really good question. Why is Hamlet cruel? And it's not a quick little answer. It takes quite a bit of discussion and multiple acts of the play to work through. Okay, you got the gist of it? And so that all I did was change one word, and then it opened up to a marvelous And you see, the question becomes a key that unlocks into all sorts of great stuff. All right, somebody take a crack at it. Pick a question. Go.
14. So was it right or wrong for this to kill all of it? But you could change it to why if you kill the food.
Yeah. And what becomes interesting about the attempts at answering that?
The answer that.
What's that?
Well, because like you said, why is it more open up?
Well, no, go to the story. What details in the story make the answers to the... Oh, you don't remember? Anybody remember what happens when he does kill all those suitors? Or do you remember? Oh, yeah, please.
Well, Zeus and Athena wipe everybody's memories.
Yes.
Right? And so
Yeah.
at the end of the story, like, otherwise we would have endless civil war happening on Ithaca. But now, by divine acts, like Odysseus can be king while having removed all his enemies.
Isn't that a great insight? And that insight gives credence to the original question. That is, there's something about killing all those suitors that rubs us the wrong way. It was it's shocking, it's disturbing. But then we realize that Athena wipes out their memories. Now, what else do we know about Athena and Odysseus? That is, what's the relationship role in the course of the epic, the Odyssey?
Athena's always protecting Odysseus. She disguises him when he first arrives. She
Yeah.
gives him insight.
Yeah.
She sent Telemachus off to find him and disguise a mentor. She's been kind of masterminding Odysseus' return.
Yes. Good. So she's on his side, and Athena, of course, is the goddess of wisdom, and so we think of Odysseus as crafty, he's deceptive, and so forth. But there is a kind of strategic purpose to what he does. And although it's bloody and the cost is very high, what has to be done is Ithaca needs to be restored. You know, the kingdom, Telemachus needs a father, Penelope needs her husband, the whole kingdom is in disarray. It needs to be restored. And the cost is very high. And Odysseus exacts that cost. That makes for a very interesting discussion. How do you think about that? Is that pretty good? Yeah, good. Okay, let's go for another one. Yes?
Number 10, what is wrong with Scout? Do you have any sympathy for my own rule?
Yes.
Say either why does Scout have sympathy, or where are we seeing the development in the text of Scout understanding the kind of relationship between the Yule family and the race relationships of the time, how they're kind of at the lowest of the white people, but they still want to be seen as kind of above the black people of the
Yes.
time. And so to have that kind of crossover puts them in a precarious position socially, kind of where she's seeing that as an observer develop, maybe.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. No, that's great. So what other kind of details in the novel are going to come up as students are piecing together their answers? What kind of, we start to pull together all the threads within the novel. Okay, now we sort of understand Scout. We understand her posture toward Mayella Yule.
And how she sees the relationship, I guess the attraction of Mayella to a black man, it kind of undermines their whole social standing.
Mm-hmm.
I think I feel like I'm going on, it's been a little while.
You're doing great. No, this is all on target, yeah.
She starts to understand why Mayella has to keep up the appearances. And some else, tying into that, I think seeing Mayella kind of keep up this little bit of, like her little garden that she keeps, her flowers that she keeps, trying to keep a certain like stature within their community, even though she knows that their family is kind of at its lowest point.
That's such a good insight. Yeah. So, and that garden humanizes Mayella Yule. When Tom Robinson said he pitied her, that humanized her too. Now that's the bomb that goes off in the courtroom, but both her gardening and his sympathy for her humanize her. And so here comes this little girl who doesn't have as much wisdom as Tom Robinson, nor the narrator, nor we who are reading the novel, but she's at her father's feet, and her father says, you don't know another man until you walk in his shoes. Well, she could translate that to, you don't really know Maelu until you walk in her shoes. And whatever, we can't expect Scout to understand what the heck's going on between Mr. Yule, Bob, and his daughter, and her own desires and so forth. A very big, mature stuff. We don't expect a little girl to understand all that, but she's got a glimpse. And so we move with her, and we who know more are sympathetically moving with her and saying, oh, wow, yeah, actually, given what she knows, especially being the daughter of Atticus Finch, isn't that a better way? It's just, yeah, okay. Yeah, this is the way we ought to be moved, right? Just like we ought to be moved the way Tom Robinson was moved. And we ought to be moved to utter sadness and maybe even some despair when his life is lost. His case is lost, his life is lost. So all those things make for big boy, big girl conversation and really make for a rich foray into Harper Lee's novel. Can someone remind me, do we end at 10 before the hour? Okay, good. So we have a few more minutes. All right, how about another one? Y'all are doing a great job. Yes, please.
Piggybacking on To Kill a Mockingbird, number 8, explain Atticus Finch's role as the white savior in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
That supposition is injecting an idea that the author didn't intend a white savior wasn't necessarily culturally relevant at that time. I think perhaps maybe a better way to think about it would be, why does Atticus Finch decide to take on the responsibility he does and exploring kind of his sense of justice and how it's apart from the cultural norms.
Yeah. A related question then, a follow-up is, how did he do? So what did you find his line of questioning of the witnesses compelling? Were you convinced that the black pastor and other members of the black community were up in the upstairs, what do you call that, mezzanine or of sorts, the gallery, they're in the gallery. Did you find their response to him, which is very respectful and grateful, is that compelling or is it condescending? Another question I might ask is, and this, I would do this rather than trying to say the white savior charge is perhaps anachronistic. The students may still have a hard time understanding that. You could ask them this: who exactly does Atticus Finch save? And the answer is? Why do you think that?
Because there's this tension between, the two races that's building in this trial, and he kind of creates an ability for everyone to walk away from that feeling like perhaps justice was.
Maybe. I'm not convinced. If for no other reason, Tom Robinson is wrongly convicted, and then he loses his life. Bob Ewell doesn't change. I don't see any evidence that the jury has changed. The jury wrongly convicts Tom Robinson precisely in the old terms. So although they don't have an argument against Atticus Finch, they still belligerently dig in and judge Tom Robinson according to their old bigoted ways. So is there hope? Yeah, I think there's hope. If for no other reason, Atticus is a good man, and his children see more of life than they would have seen otherwise. And what they see by way of his goodness. And they see it by way of the goodness of other people too. They see it by way of the goodness of the simpleton next door. What's his name? Boo Radley. They see it by the goodness of the black church community that enfolds the kids and things like that. All that moves us toward the children and toward their lives and helps us see it in context. And so that looks pretty good, but boy, there's this big ugly thing that still remains in the town. So maybe I might soften that set of observations. But it's in the game, and it's what you say is so much more interesting than if we were to, lead with a presupposition that is ill-founded, but it's also not very fruitful. That's what I'm mostly concerned about. Is I want questions that bear a lot of fruit. And as soon as you shifted the question, whoosh, it just opened up into all sorts of insight. Great job. How about another one? We're not going to get through all of these, but you all could continue this with your fellow teachers. Yeah.
I don't really know a good way to change it around because I'm not super familiar with Puffin, but that's embarrassing. Sorry to say that, but but for number two,
Oh, yeah.
there's so much focus on the author's life again, and you like in almost instantly with that question, you created a lens for them to have a view
Yeah.
next.
Yeah.
And I actually, this was a big eye opener to me because I teach the Narnia books, and I have said so many times. So, think back, C.S. Lewis's Christian instantly created a lens
Yeah.
for my students.
Yeah.
Not knowingly, but like, yeah, I've put thoughts in their minds already. And I remember reading, like some book like Unlocking the Narnia or something like
Yeah.
that, the world of Narnia or something. And it had said like C.S. Lewis said at one point he didn't actually intend to write The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as an allegory. Like it just became one, So like I almost hyper focused on the Christian symbols.
Yeah.
And maybe not, that might not have been the author's original intention,
Yeah.
And that may be argued or somebody might have pulled that quote out of context, I don't know, but
Yeah.
But it was interesting to hear you say that and then just think back on how I've focused so much in the Narnia books that
Yeah. You remember, we'll get to the Mark Twain one, but you remember the oft-repeated phrase out of the mouth of Peter, by Jove,
Yes.
by Jove. Well, Lewis, as a scholar, was an expert, oft published and oft cited as an expert on medieval numerology. And some people think that the best way to understand, if we're going to talk about what he was up to, he was trying to create, he weaved into the stories parallels to medieval templates. And Jove, of course, is the root word for jovial and joviality. And that Lewis thought very much in the middle of the last century that the world needed more joy. And so by Jove, he created something that gave us that. But let's go to the Twain one. So the one of the first of all, in both Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer, there's a lot of superstition. And superstition, students will look at that and go, "Oh, phooey, that's stupid religiosity. It's just ignoramus, belief." But the thing that comes to full boil has to do with how Huck thinks about heaven and hell in relation to his decision whether or not to help free Jim from slavery. Huck has been raised to believe that if you break the law, you go to hell. So in freeing Jim, he would break the law which preserves his slaveholder to hold Jim as a slave. And but he finally arrives at this recognition. He said, "I'm going to go to hell because I'm going to free Jim." And sometimes students go, "Oh my gosh, what a weird way of looking at the world religiously." And some people go, "Oh, this is Mark Twain, who was kind of irreligious, tweaking the nose of his religious readers." But I think a more fruitful way to look at this is to say, okay, why exactly did Huck Finn free Jim? And Huck Finn is not Mark Twain. So we should never make the mistake that the author is his character. So why exactly does Huck Finn free Jim? Well, that's what the novel's all about. That over the course of this odyssey, he grows to see Jim not just as a friend, but as a mother and father. It's like he is Huck's parent. And that is a remarkable development of storytelling given the historical context in which the story takes place. And so he experiences Jim as someone he loves, but he also experiences Jim's love for him. So it's out of love that he decides to fight for Jim's freedom. So all that superstition, all that weirdo kind of thought about heaven and hell, that's negligible. That is not negligible in terms of understanding Huck and how ignorant he is and how rough around the edges he is. But gosh, when we move with Huck toward Jim and we move with Jim toward Huck, that is when we read it sympathetically, we suffer with them, and then we rise with Huck's courage and determination. Oh man, that's just pay dirt. That's just really great stuff. Yeah. So the key is to kind of decouple the strange religiosity from the actual reason why he did it. So it is true that he resolves himself in the face of hell to go ahead and free Jim, but he's not waxing theological. It's not like he's got a moral theology by which he makes his decision. He's got something like the morality of the heart. Yeah. Okay, well, we probably don't have enough time for another one. I did want to say that at the bottom of the page is the name Cane Academy. If you go www.caneacademy.org, we have hundreds of resources for you that are free. So if you want to look up blog posts about how to teach imaginative literature, or you want to listen to some podcasts on the same, like I have a couple of really good podcasts with a Mark Twain scholar on Huck Finn in case you're interested. But we also, if you're looking for a guide, like a teacher's guide on how to teach a particular classic work of fiction, we have about 60 of them that we wrote. And they have introductions to the authors and to the books. They have chapter by chapter or book by book or act by act questions that you ought to answer before you lead your students. And then you could select from those questions ones that you think that would be really good to drive your conversations by. So let us serve you. Don't be strangers. We exist as a mission for you. And you can also reach me if you just go to the bottom of the page of contact and say, hey, Andrew, I got a question for you. And the team will get that question to me. So if you want to brainstorm, troubleshoot anything about teaching any book that you teach, if I can't answer it, I think somebody on my team will be able to answer it. We'll know where to go for a good resource, or we'll know how to answer the question directly. Thanks, everybody. I enjoyed being with you. All right.